Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Simple Handicap Podcast. Thank you, everybody, for joining in here on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. And if you're watching afterwards, I'm just going to do a quick mic switch here. That should sound a whole lot better. And if you guys can hear me a lot more clear, let me know in the live chat. I'm going to edit that out of the podcast over on Apple and Spotify. But what I was going to say is thank you for everybody joining back here on the YouTube channel. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, on this Sunday evening or Monday morning, a very good evening or good morning to you, as this is the Week 7 recap and a first live reaction to all of the Week 8 opening odds. We'll talk about everything we just saw today on Sunday, and we will react to everything we are going to see in the betting market for the first time, looking forward to week number 8. Not a good Sunday from a betting perspective as we go 0-2 on the service, bringing the season record to 33-25-2, 56.9%. However, 2 bets pending for tomorrow night on Monday Night Football, 1 on each total. If you're interested in following along with us and betting the releases with us, you can head over to raspicks.com for more information on how you can follow along. Honestly, it was a Sunday that could have got much worse. There were a couple bad decisions made, a couple frustrating outcomes in games and how they played out, but also a few games avoided that could have been a bit of a disaster as well. So I'll take it. It was a tough week. Not obviously a good result when you go 0-2, but still 2 bets pending tomorrow. Hopefully end up with a split on 2-2 as well. Lots to talk about, but surprisingly not a lot of competitive games to go through. So I think the recap here is going to be a little bit quicker as we start off with the Jacksonville Jags 32, New England 16. And so this was the London game, and it was odd to me, like waking up. I got up around 3:30. I wanted to see live reactions from Twitter, live reactions from Instagram, follow a couple team threads as well, and just figure out like what's going on with this surface. And all of the pregame reports were about players slipping. There was the video of Drake May slipping that went online. So there was a lot of kind of indications that it was going to be sort of a tricky game footing-wise. I don't know if we fully saw the extent of it. This looked like a game that was flying over in the first half, completely died out, ends up going over very late in the fourth quarter. Jacksonville ends up coming back, and let's put a recap on this. So Patriots started off the game, 2 60-plus yard drives, 1 for a touchdown, 1 for a field goal. They lead 10-0 early second quarter, and it's a game you're watching, and you're probably thinking the same I am, is where it's like, is Doug Peterson going to be allowed back in the building in Jacksonville tomorrow morning? Like, this is as dire as it gets for the Jags. And then it was shocking to see how quickly it turned around. The Jaguars, after falling behind 10-0 early second quarter, lead drives that go touchdown, punt return touchdown, defensively, touchdown, field goal, before they turn it over on downs after a 17-play, 84-yard drive that stalls in the red zone. It went from 10-0 Pats to 25-10 Jags between the 12-minute mark to go in the second quarter, 12-minute to go mark in the fourth quarter. Just a drastic turnaround. And it was surprising to see how the Pats offense completely died out against this Jags defense. Interesting comments from the safety Cisco, who allegedly called out the team pregame on the defensive side. We saw them step up, in theory, as the game went on after a tough start. So there is credit to give to the Jags for hanging on and potentially saving Peterson's job for another week and potentially saving the season, at least for another week. Still a long way to go and turn things around, but compared to how they looked a week ago against the Bears to how they looked and fought and responded against the Pats, I thought that was pretty telling. A dark takeaway from the Pats when you consider Gerard Mayo calls out the team again, and he calls the entire team soft and criticizes the defense post-game. And it was unwarranted, not provoked by the media. It wasn't a question setting it up. That was his opening statement. That's pretty damning from a head coach. You wonder what's going on there for the Pats behind the scenes. That's getting pretty ugly. The Jags outgained the Pats 6.2 to 5.5 per play, 9.7 to 6.6 per pass, 4.4 to 2.5 per rush. It was a clean sweep. Lawrence had an expected completion percentage of 74%, which is the third highest of any QB so far this week. So you think about how easy it was for the Jags offense. And when you're expected to complete 3 out of every 4 passes, just how wide open guys are, that's pretty damning for the Pats defense for yet another week. It's clear to me that May is an upgrade over Brissett. That offense has a bit of life, has a bit of explosive play potential. But defensively for the Pats, it is bad and continues to get worse. Seattle 34, Atlanta 14. I'm going to be criticized potentially for going out of rotation as I did a box score order. Pardon me if you're following this rotation order and I get out of line. So far, so good. I don't know if I have the banners in correctly on rotation. So pardon me if that. I know it's feedback I've got. I'm just pointing that out. So Seahawks win by 20. It was a quality game for Geno Smith. And we talked about that on Wednesday. He's indoors. He's facing a team that doesn't generate a lot of pressure. It was sort of expected. Now, just looking at the box score, it doesn't jump out as an, oh my God, Smith was amazing. He goes 18 for 28, 270 yards and 2 touchdowns, 7.9 per pass. Like good numbers, good game. Where it stands out to me is looking further into this. So 5.7% above expectation, which is the 6th best mark at the time of recording. He was 74th percentile in EPA per play, and he was pushing the ball downfield when he was asked to throw. His average depth of target was 12.3 yards. And more importantly, he didn't make any mistakes. And when you have Geno playing comfortably from the pocket and this offensive line not being tested, it all of a sudden flips things now to the Seahawks defensive front, which was finally healthy to step up and take over a game, which they did. This was a Seahawks defense that looked like what we saw in week 1, but we haven't seen since then because there were so many injuries. There's a little bit of noise in this with the success rates. A lot of them came on late down passes, so that padded things a little bit. But it was Seattle scoring on their first for their first 5 drives, leading 17-7 late first half, and then 24-14 late third quarter. Atlanta could never close the gap, and then it was just about Seattle capitalizing on Falcons' mistakes to put this game away. After Atlanta missed a field goal, Seattle scores, and then they get the strip sack, return that for a touchdown, and all of a sudden there's another Cousins pick in the second half, and the game's over at that point. And even though Atlanta runs 15 more plays than the Seahawks did in this game, Seattle outgains Atlanta 6.1 to 5.4 yards per play and 7.9 to 5.9 per pass. It was Cousins' worst game since week 1. He finished minus 0.33 EPA per pass on early downs. A pretty concerning number, especially when you start to think about the Falcons' recent games, perhaps very much aided by opposing defense and schedule. That Bucs game was a bit of a chase game late where they were pushed. And then this is a spot here where with the Seahawks down multiple starters in the secondary coming into the game, Atlanta just never got much going through the air and weren't able to have a clean game. You finally saw Pitts emerge a little bit, and Bijan had a good game on the ground. But in a game where the pass attack for Atlanta should have been a lot more present, it just wasn't in this spot. Mistakes doing the Falcons as Seattle takes over and wins this game 34-14. Buffalo 34, Tennessee 10. This is not in many ways a misleading box score. I would say the way that the game played out, perhaps it's a bit of a misleading final in terms of how it played out. When you look at 34-10 for Buffalo, the thought process is this must have been a dominant Bills game from wire to wire. When you look at the box score, the Bills outgained the Titans 7.2 per play to 4.3, 9.3 per pass to 4.7, and they were +2 in turnover margins. And so everything about this indicates that it was just wire-to-wire dominance for Buffalo. Fact is, it wasn't that. And believe it or not, if you didn't watch the game or follow it, the Titans were leading 10-7 at half. And I'm reading through my Twitter timeline, and I have the Bills feed on, and I have the Titans feed on, and everything's talking about how the Bills offense is struggling, how there's nobody getting open, how everything is tight downfield in terms of coverage windows. And it's a lot of concern for the Buffalo offense for yet another week in a row. Amari Cooper at this point's not present in the game plan. He's not making a difference. It was pretty ugly for the Bills in the first half of this game. And it was looking like it was going to get worse. And something that might not be discussed a whole lot is on the Titans' first drive of the third quarter, Mason Rudolph scrambles on second down just shy of midfield. He appears to get the spot. There is no replay assist, of course, because we have no idea when replay assist shows up. So there's nothing overturned. Callahan doesn't challenge. It's spotted short. On the next play, there's a fumble. And then on the fourth down attempt, Pollard is stuffed. This should have been a Titans first down near midfield coming out of the half up 10-7. Instead, big momentum shift. It's a turnover on downs. The Bills start inside the Tennessee 45, and it's a quick score touchdown. From this point onward, it's just wide open for the Buffalo Bills. There was no more scoring from Tennessee. Buffalo goes on to outscore the Titans 27-0 in the second half. And it's just a complete turnaround from what we saw in the first half from the Bills. Amari Cooper gets his touchdown. We're seeing receivers break out and find a lot of space. Just a complete collapse from the Tennessee Titans. And the Titans are a team that I continue to just really not be able to figure out. I was expecting, once the news came late that Mason Rudolph was starting, that you probably see an offensive bump. And then what do you see from Calvin Ridley? 2 catches, irrelevant stat line. What do you see from DeAndre Hopkins? Your wide receiver number 1. -2 yards on 1 reception. How this team can't get anything going outside the numbers, even now with the quarterback's shift, I don't know. I don't know what's continuing to go on in Tennessee and how this team is so different from what they say, but it is another week where those 2 guys make zero impact. The offense looks stuck, and the Bills come back in a big way in the second half to lead to a dominating win. Cincinnati 21, Cleveland 14, in a game that is most certainly going to be disguised by the injury to Deshaun Watson. And that looks like a definite season ender. I don't believe there's been official designation yet. Everything looks like it is an Achilles injury. What's perhaps the talking point to come from this is pregame, there was a tweet that came out from a reporter talking to Kevin Stefanski, who said that he told Dorian Thompson-Robinson to be extra prepared, and Jameis Winston was going to be the emergency third-string quarterback. And so pregame, obviously not anticipating injury, but from a coaching decision, it was made to elevate DTR to the backup and then to demote Jameis Winston to third string. And so Deshaun Watson goes down with the Achilles. He's out. DTR comes in, and quarterback play does not get any better. I mean, DTR looked as bad, if not worse, than Deshaun Watson, and it took a DTR finger injury to take him out of the game to get Jameis Winston into the game, activating the emergency QB protocol. And it was late in the game. Winston leads the scoring drive. He gets the touchdown to Njoku at the back of the end zone on an amazing catch. He's the quarterback that everybody has been calling for. I don't know if this is what Cleveland is going to go forward with. It's weird to me that there was that promotion and demotion pregame. The injury to DTR was labeled as not serious or not concerning. So perhaps there's a chance he's back. I tell you, there's no way that I could be comfortable in Stefanski's position starting DTR over Winston, given how the season has gone and how things have progressed. I don't understand that mindset or that logic or that line of thinking, but that seems to be a possibility. When it comes to this game specifically, the Bengals win 21-14. The Browns, as I mentioned, add that garbage time TD late. They fail on the onside kick. But this was another pretty gross game for the Cincinnati Bengals offense. They returned the opening kick for a touchdown, but they did not have a drive for more than 35 yards until midway through the third quarter. They scored after a 4-play, 50-yard drive following a good punt return that was aided by a 15-yard penalty on the Browns that pushed field position up. And they had another big return that set up another score too. This was a bad game for the Bengals offense. And it was the second bad game in a row for the Bengals offense after just an electric start to the season for Joe Burrow in this offense that was disguised by the defense. So maybe starting to see some concerns for the Bengals offense. At least that's how media is beginning to talk about it. End of the day, the Browns actually outgained the Bengals by 0.2 yards per play, despite starting and playing 3 quarterbacks. And they outgained the Bengals 336 to 223 in total yardage. I want to give a bit of a break to Joe Burrow in the offense because they always have a history of struggling against this Browns defense. The fact they get out of a win and they continue to keep the season alive, I think was telling. Suffered a big injury on defense, which we'll talk about on the injury side of the things a little bit later. Green Bay 24, Houston 22. This is a game where there's a lot to look at inside of the box score. Got pretty weird, pretty wacky. We've got some odd numbers out of this game. So the Packers outgained the Texans 277 to 197, 4.9 per play to 4.3, and 5.4 per pass to 2.2. The two teams were nearly equal per rush. And I say all of this because in those numbers, you would think, hearing that it is the Packers comfortably winning a low-scoring football game. In reality, it was the Packers escaping with a walk-off field goal in the fourth quarter in what turned out to be a fairly high-scoring football game that fell just short of what the closing total was. And so how in the world did we get here, and what are we looking at? The Packers turned the ball over 3 times, and all 3, it led to Texans scores. And Houston was able to put up points and pad the stat line on a 4-play, 6-yard field goal drive, a 5-play, 55-yard touchdown drive, and following a muffed punt by the Packers, a 2-play, 11-yard touchdown drive. So that is 3 scores, 3 drives on just 71 combined yards, all of those coming in the first half. And so as you look at this game and you look at the box score and you look at the play-by-play, there was nothing impressive from Houston. If you're going to stretch and say what was the stand-up for Houston, it would be Joe Mixon for the second week in a row. But the fact is the Houston Texans offense was putrid. You look at C.J. Stroud, 10 of 21 for 86 yards, 6.9% below expectation for his completion rate. Green Bay was far more impressive in everything that they did. They had a 13-play, 92-yard drive, a 6-play, 70-yard touchdown drive, a 9-play, 71 touchdown drive, 71 yards, pardon me. Love was 10% above expectation. I mean, if it was not for Joe Mixon keeping the Houston Texans offense moving at times, this was going to be as lopsided of a box score as you're typically ever going to see. And you think about that total output of 197 and Mixon going for 115 on the ground. He was the vast majority of the entire Houston Texans offense for the duration of the game. And so a couple takeaways in this is, one, I think we saw the Packers defense led by Jeff Hafley. Like, this is why the change was made, able to generate pressure as tight as they were playing in the secondary. I mean, this is the type of game and type of performance that I think justifies the switch, justifies the scheme change, justifies the personnel adjustment. It's what you wanted to see as a Packers fan. For Houston, I think it's continued question marks on the offense going forward without Nico Collins. The on-off splits, not just this season, but in last year as well, they're just so one-sided when he is not on the field. And the passing game for the Houston Texans is just in shambles at the moment without him. And so I don't know how much of that is an ongoing concern as Collins targets a Week 10 return. There's going to have to be more games played without him. In the best case scenario, probably at least 2 more. I don't know, but that is, it's ugly right now for Houston moving the football. And incredibly, they were able to stay within the number and cover, which has got to be just a terrible beat for anybody who had the Packers in this game. But this is a Texans offense that needs some answers in a hurry. Indianapolis 16, Miami 10. This was painful. This was a killer. We released the over on the service, and I mean, it was dead from the start nearly. It looked like it was going to be 7-7 late first quarter. It ended up 7-0. We're deep into the second quarter, and it was over. And then lots of interest from me on the Miami side never comes to fruition. So let's break this down. This is pretty gruesome all the way. It was a painful watch start to finish. No question about it. The Dolphins do outgain the Colts 337 to 284. And so you see 16-10. Obviously, some funny stuff going on, and that happened in the second half we'll get to. Dolphins also 5.0 yards per play to 4.7. The two teams nearly equal in a per play and per rush perspective. A slight edge to Miami. Dolphins were a net plus 7% in success rate, but they were minus 0.03 in net EPA per play. So very, very tight box score. Slight edge to Miami. They lose 16-10. Tyler Huntley was hurt in the third quarter, but even prior to Huntley being hurt, I don't know what the Dolphins' game plan was in this spot. And it is the second week in a row that I am baffled by an offense and their game plan going up against a Colts defense who, prior to last week against Tennessee, had just given up so much to opposing wide receivers outside the numbers. And the Dolphins went until the fourth quarter to get Tyreek Hill a completion. Jayden Waddle had one catch for 11 yards. The two best playmakers on the field for Miami were not involved in this game at all. Were barely even targeted. I don't know why it was so complicated and why Jonnu Smith needs to be the featured option. It's not like this is a brand new rookie QB that has a fear of throwing outside the numbers. It's coming out of the bye week with a veteran in Huntley. Why are these two guys not the featured part of the game plan against this defense? Nevertheless, it gets messy for the Dolphins in the second half. They have a scenario where they're deep inside the red zone. They're at the Indianapolis 12-yard line. They elect to hand it off to the fullback, Alec Ingold, instead of going to any of the three star running backs, which they have available and healthy. Ingold gets held up, fumbles. Colts end up taking the ball back. That prevents Miami from going in for the score and likely sealing the win and the cover. Miami ends up getting the ball back. It is 3rd and 1 from around the Indianapolis 35. Who do they go to again? Not Raheem Mostert, not Tyreek Hill, not Jalen Waddle, not Jalen Wright, not Devon Achane, not to any of these speed guys. They go to the fullback, Alec Ingold. Again, it's like playing Madden, just hammering triangles for the fullback dive, hoping that it works out. Didn't work out when he fumbled, doesn't work out again. So it's 4th and 1. The game at this time is 13-10. There's just under 5 minutes to play in the fourth quarter. Mike McDaniel, who has this electric offense, even with Tim Boyle under center, you've still got all these weapons. 1 yard to go. You're down 3 on the road. You're coming out of the bye. You likely get Tua back next week. There's less than 5 minutes to go. It's a free gamble, effectively, because you have a season reset on deck next week. Field goal kicker comes out. They attempt a 54-yard field goal. Looks good the entire way. Curves left, hits the upright, ends up falling short. No good. Indianapolis goes down the field. They end up in a scenario where they have to settle for a field goal after not getting the first down when Richardson was hit behind the line of scrimmage. They go up 16-10. Miami drives down inside the Colts 30 at the end of the game. They end up checking it down to Devon Achane, who can't get out of bounds. The clock runs out, and Tim Boyle decides to throw it out of bounds on the final play of the game and not give any wide receiver a chance. And so amid all of this and the issues where Miami in the second half either punted or turned the ball over on every drive, Anthony Richardson return, he ends up winning the game. The Colts end up covering. Anthony Richardson finishes minus 0.31 EPA per play, which was a 11th percentile performance. He was 14.1% below expectation for completion rate, which was worse than any quarterback not named Dorian Thompson-Robinson. He wins the game and covers for the Colts, who get away with it 16-10, despite Richardson completing only 10 passes during the game. And so this game, to me, much more about Miami's mistakes and inability to finish drives and score and late game decision-making, which went awry amid the Colts with Richardson returning, just not having any sustained offense at all. They look good on the ground running the football, but in the passing game, it was overthrows, it was wild throws, it was missed potential completions. You had a big drop from Alec Pierce. Everything was just very disconnected for this Colts offense. And there were times where this number for Richardson looks a little bit worse than it is because of some drops and some throws that should have been caught, but this was still a very bad performance by Richardson. A game Miami, given the context of the season, is likely going to regret not winning in their opportunities where they definitely had to get out of this game with a victory. Philadelphia 28, New York Giants 3. There's not a whole lot to say here because this is another dominant box score in favor of the Philadelphia Eagles. 2 weeks in a row. 339 to 119 for yards, 5.2 to 2.2 per play.
The Eagles were plus 0.56 in net EPA per play and a net 12% success rate. I mean, that is incredibly one-sided. And the game played out as such. The Giants had a second percentile offensive performance. Jones was sacked 7 times. The offensive line was destroyed. The Eagles' defensive front has them consistently under pressure. But what throws me off about this amid the dominance was Jalen Hurts kind of contributed almost nothing in the passing game. He was 10 for 14 for 114 yards. And a lot of that was aided by a 4th and 3 go ball to A.J. Brown down the sideline, which was an amazing play. But that's all he had to do. Everything else for Philly in this game that led to that dominance was running the football. More than 40 times they handed the football off to either Barkley, Gainwell, or had Hurts running, who had 2 touchdowns on the day too. I don't want to discredit the performance for Jalen Hurts, but it is a weird... I don't really know how to describe it. It's 28-3. It's one-sided, but it still felt like the Eagles' offense was coasting at best. I struggle to know what to make of it, because anybody watching knows that I'm high on the Eagles and their expectations. Games like this and how they played out in this manner, to me, is what the Eagles brought in Kellen Moore to get away from. Now, like, I don't want to knock a team being so dominant that they can run the football 45 times, pass it only 14, and get away with a 4-score win. Like, I don't want to take away from that. But it's like, this is not what I expected the Eagles offense to turn into and look like. And I'm sure when the route trees are posted again, it's going to be very simplistic for Brown on the outside. There's not going to be a lot of creativity. When it goes well, it looks great. This strategy and style of play, in my opinion, against better competition is going to be hard to maintain and replicate. That's just my takeaway. And again, like, it's not devaluing the dominance of this game for the Eagles. But again, like, in a season where you're trying to figure things out on offense and you're trying to get things right, Jalen Hurts is sitting on the bench with 12 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, and Kenny Pickett is in. He attempted 1 pass, and on the next 3 possessions, the Eagles just ran the football every single play to take the game out. And the Giants waved the white flag too, as they bring in Drew Lock, who, I mean, that makes a lot more sense given how things are going. But in a year where the Eagles are trying to figure things out on offense, you're just taking a quarter off, I guess, in division against the Giants. It's like, who needs the fourth quarter? We'll sit Hurts. We'll figure it out later. Luxury to be able to do it, but it's just odd to me to have that play out that way. Dominating game again for the second week in a row from the box score perspective. But man, I don't know. Detroit 31, Minnesota 29. This was a fun game to watch. Another painful one for us, as we had a late release on Minnesota today. These game day releases, I tell you, we haven't won one, I believe, this season. I want to say we're 0 for 7. Those obviously include the release shows. Toughest market to beat once you get past Thursday. And some of these games that shape up where there's opportunity on game day just have not gone our way at all. When we're talking about the Lions 31, Vikings 29, there's some stuff to definitely sift through here and try to figure out. My high-level takeaway is the Lions are the best team in the NFC. Don't think that's a hot take at the moment. There were concerns early season. I think a lot of the concerns we saw were perhaps influenced a little bit by result. What we saw was Ben Johnson just getting hyper-aggressive, targeting weaknesses of opposing defenses. And just, like the Tampa Bay game, the Lions lived in the red zone. They only scored once. There was another game that's slipping on the top of my mind. They flipped the script and went crazy, run heavy in that, and got burned a little bit because of it. I don't think it was negatives, but I think that those kind of skew and muddy the waters on how good Detroit has been really for the duration of the season. Then they have this game against Minnesota, and I was impressed. Again, I was impressed by Jared Goff specifically and his ability to handle pressure, which I was expecting to be a big issue for him, because it always has been numbers-wise. It's been a drop-off, and he navigated it very well. So neutral box score when you're looking at the basic ESPN box score. Nothing too crazy in the play-by-play. Go into advanced numbers, things start to look a little different. Lions finished plus 0.1 EPA per play and 7% net success rate in their favor. Then you get, so it's like, okay, so Lions, dominating, making bigger plays, more sustained offense. Not crazy, but that's out there. And then you get to the QB line, and it's like, holy smokes. Goff plus 0.52 per drop back, plus 16% net success rate when compared directly to Darnold. And so when it comes down to it, when bigger plays needed to be made, Jared Goff was making them. And some of these were certainly aided by third down plays, but big plays turned into chunk gains, turned into touchdowns, and just the effectiveness and the impact of these plays when they were made skewed heavily in Goff's favor in the head-to-head battle. And so advanced stats show how great Jared Goff was in this game, perhaps devalued Darnold a little bit. And I think it's important to look at that because just at like face value, when you're looking at, say, like an ESPN box score, you see Goff 22 for 25, 280 and 2 touchdowns. And then you see Darnold 22 for 27 for 259, a pick and a touchdown. And you're like, the difference between these performances like isn't that big. And you look at the advanced stats and you're like, this is significant advantage. And that was very impressive for Jared Goff, very impressive for the offense as well. And the Lions, in a way, overcame a bit of the luck factor as well, or a bit of a luck disadvantage, if you will. They failed on the fake punt attempt early in the game. That immediately set up a Vikings score. The Vikings had a strip sack and a fumble returned for a touchdown. And so even with that happening, the Lions were able to overcome it and end up winning the game by 2 in a very difficult environment to play and putting the Vikings back into closer realm with the conversation they were in coming into the season. I think the big takeaway or the big question mark for me in this game is the Vikings defense potentially a bit overrated? And I only say that because Sam Darnold in this game attempted his first pass of the entire season trailing beyond the first quarter. We know Brian Flores loves to get very aggressive up front, loves to bring pressure. When you think about a 7-week window, including a bye, 6 games, and your quarterback is throwing passes from a deficit on the scoreboard in just one of them beyond the first quarter, think about the positive scenarios that's continuously putting the defense in when matched up with this play caller and this scheme. It's not to knock what the Vikings have been doing, but in this game where an offense was playing you that was pressed and your offense wasn't playing from a comfortable spot and your defense had to step up, we saw them crumble on some of these high leverage spots and these important downs, and the pressure just wasn't as effective when the scoreboard is close or playing from behind as it has looked so far this season when the Vikings are playing with a big lead and there's not a lot of downside to gambling, not getting home, and getting burned on the back end. And so perhaps that's a question to take away and something to think about going forward. Washington 40, Carolina 7. I did my box score recap write-up on bettingtalk.com at the start of the fourth quarter because the game was over. It was 37-0. Anything beyond this would have been garbage time contribution. And this was expected, but not expected to be this incredibly one-sided. But let's talk about it a little bit because it was a game we have a final score. The Commanders got whatever they wanted on offense. And it incredibly didn't matter that Jaden Daniels went down with a ribs injury and Marcus Mariota came in. It's like the offense didn't miss a beat because when you're playing a defense like this, it doesn't matter. And Washington was able to build a 3-score lead with 2 receivers making a catch each. I mean, the amount of push and dominance that we saw on the ground was crazy. In this game, at the start of the fourth quarter, keep in mind, 335 to 135, 7.2 to 3.9 per play, 7.6 to 5.4 per pass. And here's what's crazy, 7.0 to 3.8 per rush. I don't know where the Panthers defense goes from here because it cannot get any worse. They have no personnel up front. They are riddled with injuries. What is the answer? They've given up at least 34 points for 4 weeks in a row. And here's what's even worse. There's not even a luck component to this. The Commanders had 6 scoring drives and faced a total on those 6 scoring drives of just 6 third downs. I mean, it was first and second down contributions for the Commanders in this game nonstop. And so even with Marcus Mariota in the game, this Panthers defense facing a backup allows a 63% rushing success rate in the first 3 quarters. That's 99th percentile. Marcus Mariota as a QB coming in cold off the bench puts up a 59% success rate, also 99th percentile. Mariota was plus 0.5 EPA per play at the end of the third quarter and 15.9% above expectation. If you put in contrast the net EPA for the first 3 quarters between the Commanders offense with Marcus Mariota and the Panthers offense with Andy Dalton, every time that the ball was snapped, the Commanders were gaining 0.7 points per snap. That is how dominant it was. That's how bad it was for the Panthers defense. And it's not like there's answers because everybody's hurt for Carolina. And so this is a unit that is quickly the worst defense in football, and they are just getting bullied every single week. LA Rams 20, Las Vegas 15. This game finished just as I was coming on air. What in the world do you make of that decision from Antonio Pierce late in the game? I know there was a comment in the live chat just as I came on. It is 20-12. The Raiders are on the road. They have been struggling all game. Aiden O'Connell is out of the game. You're on to Gardner Minshew. You are driving the football. The drive is taking an eternity. It started back at the Las Vegas 25 with 10 minutes to play in the fourth quarter. The Raiders are down 20-12. They have life in the game. They take up 8 minutes of clock. They have a first and goal at the LA Rams 4-yard line with just under 4 minutes to play. It takes them 6 minutes to get there. But it's a first and goal. You score, you get to 2, you're tied, you have a chance to get away with potentially stealing a victory if you can get a stop in regulation or in overtime. 1st and 4 from the LA 4, incomplete. 2nd and 4 from the LA 4, incomplete. 3rd and 4 from the LA 4, incomplete. 4th and 4, okay, you got to go for it. You need 4 yards for a chance to tie the game. Right now on the clock, there's 2:50 to go. Nope. Antonio Pierce says we're going to kick a field goal. I'm speechless at that decision. It can't be justified. It's illogical. Just bizarre. The field goal is good. Congratulations. It is 20-15. You give the ball back. Sure enough, works out in his favor. He ends up getting the punt. And so traditional football fans are going to look at it and say like, hey, this was justified. In no world is that justified, ever. Rams end up punting it back. It is a fair catch. The Raiders start with no timeouts, $1:39 to go from their own 11-yard line. Gardner Minshew ends up being intercepted 2 plays later. Rams kneel out the game. Rams win 20-15. Just a mind-boggling and baffling decision by the Raiders late in the game with that decision. Shocking. Now, you look at the stat lines in this game. It is the Raiders outgaining the Rams 317 and 259, but the Rams 5.0 to 4.2 per play, 6.0 to 4.2 per pass, and then they were net neutral when it came to running the football on a per-play basis. What I will say in this game is the Rams get away 20-15, but this was more a story, as much as it wants to be late in the game, about Antonio Pierce and his decision-making, just mistakes the Raiders made that the LA Rams were able to capitalize on. So it was an interception late in the second quarter that led to a 4-play, 47-yard touchdown drive for the Rams. That was 7-3 LA at the time. You go into the mid-second quarter of this, and it's the Raiders 3-0 amid the quarterback injury and all of the struggles. The Rams weren't doing much. They pick off, it was Minshew late in the second quarter. They set up the short touchdown drive. It's 7-3 LA. Next possession, 4 plays later, Minshew is sacked. The ball is stripped. The Rams recover and return it 14-3. So this game was 3-0 for the Raiders with 3 minutes to play in the second quarter. By the time you get to 1:14 left in the second quarter, it's the Rams up 14-3. And then in the second half, it continued. Again, Gardner Minshew was picked off deep in his territory at the 31. LA goes 2 plays, 31 yards for a touchdown to take the lead 20-6. And then the Raiders end up kicking a field goal. They pick off Stafford. The Rams miss a field goal. Raiders answer with that field goal on the boneheaded decision from Antonio Pierce. And that's how the game finishes 20-15. But the Rams were in a bit of trouble later in the second quarter. Got a few breaks, got a few turnovers, and the game was really won on the heels of the Rams defense being able to hold up. Those defensive changes we talked about on the Wednesday preview looked like they showed through. They definitely did from a per play basis. They definitely did from a takeaway and a turnover perspective. Again, just undisciplined from the Raiders, 10 penalties, 80 yards, just a team that's looking like they're being led by an interim head coach that is very much over his head in this time, and it is just a baffling decision late in the game. Last game up to recap, Kansas City 28, San Francisco 12. It's actually 28-18. I put the banner in before we came on. I guess San Francisco added a score late that I missed as we came on the air. Went live with just a little less than 2 minutes left. It looks like they did score, in fact, very late with 1:08 to go. Okay, 28-18 final. Doesn't change a whole lot. It shows how sharp and well-lined a lot of these totals are getting late in the week, I think. San Francisco, 5.5 per play to 4.8, 6.5 per pass to 5.0, and then per rush, Kansas City with a slight edge as the Chiefs really leaned on Kareem Hunt. Wasn't super effective when you look at 22 carries for 78 yards, but 2 touchdowns, got Hardman involved in the ground game. Mahomes was mobile when he needed with a big run late, and then the scramble on the 4th down to get into the end zone to put the game away. I could point to the questionable decision by Kyle Shanahan scoring to make it 14-12 early third quarter and not going for 2. Odd decision that led to a missed extra point, and that certainly looked a lot different later in the game. A few ways that I can go with this. The first, I think we're starting to see the Chiefs' limitations. Sky Moore, hard to justify him having a roster spot. It was another game where you look at the stat sheet for the Chiefs and the receiver line. It's like Noah Gray, 4 for 66 as your best option. Travis Kelce, basically non-existent. Samaje Perine contributing. Worthy had his 1 catch. I mean, there's just not a lot here. But the fact that they were able to overcome and win and get to 6-0, I feel like it's last year, and we're just repeating the same storylines over and over again. What's interesting to me in this game, in the context of it, was Mahomes played very poorly. He did, as I mentioned, contribute with his legs at 2 key times, but he's just 16 for 27 for 154 with no touchdowns throwing and 2 picks. And those picks, especially the one in the second half, looked like it was going to be very detrimental in how the game was progressing and swinging, especially after the 49ers get that score. But this was a game that was entirely won on the heels of the defense for Kansas City. As we talked about on Wednesday, more man coverage was expected. They ended up playing a ton of man. We'll get the numbers later. I'm sure it's going to be a very high rate of man coverage. That's how it looked on screen. We're very effective in coverage across the board. The only real gaffe all game was down the sideline to George Kittle, who is going to be a problem in this matchup consistently. But you think about the mistakes from Brock Purdy, who really struggled in this game. As you get into the later part of the third quarter, it's 14-12 Chiefs. The 49ers are driving. They're right outside the Kansas City red zone at the 34. It's a pass that's picked off, an interception on a miscommunication, overthrows his wide receiver. It's picked off at the sideline. Right next possession, as you're getting into the early stages of the fourth quarter, it's goal to go inside the Kansas City 5, and you're trying to attempt a pass to Conley, and that's interception inside the Kansas City end zone. The Chiefs get away with it. A great game by the Chiefs defense, great game by the secondary. I think this secondary perhaps is lagging behind a little bit to where they were last year, and the defensive front is playing at a higher level than they were last year. And that might have been masked a little bit in this game with the late news that Deebo Samuel had the illness, played very few snaps. Also, Brandon Ayuk was lost early in the second half. That looks like it's going to be a long-term injury. And so that perhaps gave the Chiefs a bit of an out in this game when you think about the Niners offense down guys. But it was certainly another spot where the Chiefs defense gets them the win. Now 6-0 on the season. The last undefeated team in the 49ers fall to 3-4. Several injuries to talk about before I get to some questions and into the live reaction for the Week 8 openers. Cincinnati looks bad for Geno Stone. He was carted off. That's a big loss for a secondary and the defense that was finally getting healthy. Orlando Brown goes down on the O-line. Cleveland, as mentioned, Deshaun Watson, I think it's safe to say that's a season ender, perhaps a career ender. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, finger injury, unclear but deemed not serious. Jacksonville lost left tackle Cam Robinson to a concussion. Huge loss on the offensive line. Aiden O'Connell, thumb injury. That looks like it could be long-term, especially if it's broken. Miami, Tyler Huntley goes down with a throwing shoulder injury. He was walking off. He couldn't lift it up. That looks ugly, although Tua is expected back in Week 8. Philadelphia lost Becton on the O-line to a concussion. They lost Mailata last week as well. And so now you're down 2 offensive line starters in an offense that wasn't affected by it today. What's that going to look like? Seattle loses DK Metcalf. There was a clip of him on the sideline with a knee injury. They were doing tests. Big guy, tough guy. He was showing clear signs of pain. He couldn't walk to the locker room. He was carted off. Brandon Ayuk, potentially knee, leg, looked severe. He had to be carted off, whether it's a break, tear, waiting to see. That looks serious. And then Jaden Daniels for Washington, rib injury. He was on the sideline, looked more uncomfortable than it did pain, but I wonder how much of him not returning was due to the fact that the Commanders were up by 95 points halfway through the second quarter. So perhaps there wasn't the need to rush him back. And then when it comes to Week 8 returnees, possible guys getting back for teams, Tua had a lot of Twitter chatter about potentially returning. Cooper Kupp was close. He should be back for Week 8. DeForest Buckner was close. He should be back for Week 8 for Indy. TJ Hawkinson is eligible to return this week. And then Carolina has Jordan Brooks, the running back, practicing. He was at practice last week, has a chance to be back this week. Other 2 outstanding. Nico Collins, the update there was a Week 10 target. And then Puka Nacua had a Week 10 to 11 target for return for the Rams. Lots of comments coming into the chat. Lots of coach criticism, which is absolutely justified. Rudy says McDaniels was game planning for next week. Lots of inexcusable comments for how the Raiders handled the end game. It's just the coaching malpractice league-wide with some of these late games decisions, despite all the resources in the world, continue to surprise me. Let's get to Week 8 opening lines. Everybody's favorite segment of the show. You guys are always listening. I'm always trying. I know a lot of people benefit from this segment. Hopefully it continues to be helpful as we progress through another season of doing this. Thursday Night Football. Minnesota Vikings on the road at the LA Rams. Vikings 3-point favorites on the look ahead. Reopen 3.5 plus 110 at Chris, minus 110 at Buckeye. Bet online 3.5 even. Total 46 on the look ahead, up to 46.5, shaded to the over. I was very, very, very much hoping that Minnesota would win, not only for the release and covering the spread of obviously a game we're financially interested in, but to get a jacked up number in this spot to play into the Rams coming off of what was likely a season-preserving win against the Raiders, with the season effectively on the line at home on the short week, with the familiarity between the teams, with Cooper Kupp coming back, and a quarterback like Matthew Stafford, who could handle the blitz and pressure of Minnesota as a veteran quarterback can. And I thought that maybe that Vikings pass rush was in fact a little bit inflated, and maybe it was going to be inflated even more after playing Jared Goff, who tended to struggle. And in reality, what we saw is the Lions win Goff looked very good. Now that's kind of out there. And the Rams get, honestly, a little bit lucky in that game against the Raiders. And so you don't see a big change in the number. And that's probably not a price that is too appealing to get in and bet the Rams in this spot, as I was certainly hoping that it would be. It just wasn't a good Sunday of results to set up what could have been perhaps a decent spot in this game. I don't want to run and bet on the Vikings, I don't think, in this spot, but I was sure hoping that this was maybe going to get to like a 4.5 or something off a convincing Vikings win, and then Rams as a dog. So we'll see what comes of this as the week goes on. Tennessee on the road at the Detroit Lions. Lions from 9.5 on the look ahead through the 10 up to 11.5. Total from 45 up to 46.5. Biggest number we've seen the Lions lay this year. I want to say off the top of my head, this is the biggest point spread that we have seen this year. You can correct me in the live chat if I'm wrong with that. In theory, the Titans' run defense could pose problems for the Lions running. But boy, let's say it's Mason Rudolph and you get the full practice week and you're going on the road and it's everything sorted out. This is such a tough spot for an offense that just they can't get wide receivers involved at all. I don't know if it's that much of a letdown off of the win for the Lions either, and how they're continuing to play. Nothing here for me. Total getting bet up. Maybe I don't fully understand, considering how bad the Titans offense has been. Sure, okay, let's say that Rudolph is an upgrade. I think we would all agree that Rudolph is an upgrade. Is it deserving of that, considering how bad the offense has looked, regardless of what quarterback is under there? I don't know. Baltimore, Cleveland still off of the board because, quite frankly, I don't think anybody knows who's going to be starting for the Browns in this game. Now, look ahead here was Ravens minus 9.5. We'll see the Ravens play on Monday Night Football. Tough game to set a number on. If you say the Ravens win and cover, but Jameis Winston starts for the Browns, that maybe offsets. If it's DTR, this probably ends up off of Ravens win and cover on Monday night against the Bucs. 11.5, perhaps, is what you get to. Green Bay on the road at the Jacksonville Jags. Packers 3.5 on the look ahead. They're now 4 at Chris, 4.5 at BetOnline, 4.5 at Pinnacle, 4.5 at FanDuel. When I look at the BetOnline price, it reopened 4, got bet up just now as high as 5. At 5, there was resistance. The Jags effectively save things for now against a very bad Patriots defense. Now they're taking on a Packers team that I feel like is in a completely different class and category than what they have faced in the last 2 weeks in Chicago and then New England. I would certainly tend to lean here towards Green Bay in the early going as I'm looking at this price, knowing that the Jags defense, even if they were called out and elevated, it looks a lot better perhaps against Drake May and the Pats offense than it's going to against Jordan Love and these 4 wide receivers when you're trying to play man coverage against that. That is not a winning recipe for success when you still, even with the number 1 cornerback. I mean, that is a tough matchup defensively. I wonder if this total continues to go up potentially as the Jags continue to outperform the average in yards per play. It has already been adjusted up from 46.5 to 48. Maybe it ends up going a tick higher. We'll see. Indianapolis on the road at the Houston Texans. Houston, a 6.5-point favorite on the look ahead. Reopen is 6 flat. Total from 48.5 down to 46.5. My reads on the Colts have been atrocious, especially the last 2 weeks. Houston and Indy obviously know each other very well, dating back to last year with those 2 games that were very close and competitive. This year in week 1, it was a game that was very close and competitive, but the big advantage that Houston has had in all of these games against Indianapolis is Nico Collins putting up crazy stat lines. He is not there. The Texans are definitely going to have to tweak their offense in this spot to have a similar performance. I don't think they have the same answers against this Colts defense and these cover 3 looks without Nico Collins. And there hasn't been anything the last couple weeks to suggest they have guys to fill in and do something about the hole that is left by Collins. So that makes me a little worrisome in that spot as we see Green Bay, Jacksonville get bashed over up to 49.5 at BetOnline. So people agree with that sentiment too of the Packers against that Jags defense. So yeah, I'm not sure what you can do with Indy and Houston in this spot with the Houston injuries. Arizona, Miami off the board. Cardinals play tomorrow. Atlanta, Tampa Bay off the board. Bucks played tomorrow. Chicago, Washington not open because of the Jaden Daniels injury. This was Washington -2.5 on the look ahead. Caleb Williams and Chicago got the week off after the London game and after the London win. Chicago has benefited a ton from soft opposing defenses. Washington is still a very bad defense, and it is still a defense that is banged up in the defensive front 7. They have got some surprise play from corners that has elevated things a little bit in recent weeks. We'll have to see on the quarterback spot. If Jaden Daniels is out, the Bears are definitely going to be favored. If Jaden Daniels is in and he is limited mobility-wise, I don't think this can get adjusted up from the 2.5 on the look ahead, given the circumstances of both of the teams coming in. Jets, Pats, still off of the board. This was 7 and 38.5 on the look ahead. I don't know what we're going to see from the Jets offense coming up in about 7 minutes against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think the Pats are a pretty clear over team at this point, with the head coach calling out how soft the defense is and Mayen on the offensive side. Game 1 between these two teams, I'm going to pull it up quickly to see what that number closed at. It was a Thursday night game. It was the first game for the new coaching staff in New England going on the road. That game closed 39. This can't be lower. And the look ahead was lower. So we'll see. Buffalo on the road at the Seattle Seahawks. The Bills a 3-point favorite on the look ahead. Reopen is dead in line at -3. It is a long flight across for the Buffalo Bills to get into Seattle. The Seahawks defensive front, as I mentioned, looked like it did in week 1. That's a big bonus for that defense run by Mike McDaniel. There are concerns in the secondary. The Bills started off very slow in this matchup, depending on the health of the Seahawks secondary. I would expect that the Bills, with personnel added with Amari Cooper, could end up trying to stretch things a little bit down the field, because sticking in that run first look from heavier personnel is probably going to be a lot tougher against the Seahawks front when it's healthy than it has been for, say, a team like Detroit in that game on Monday Night Football. So it's a bit of an evolution and a change here for the Seahawks defense. I would think the concern for Seattle with DK Metcalf is pretty strong and pretty severe. With the total, I don't know weather-wise how you can be confident betting a Seahawks game this far out. I know here, I'm in White Rock, BC. I'm about 2 hours north of Lumen Field. I was eyeing up a potential tea time later on Saturday next week in the afternoon to get in 9 as the wife is out of town. It's ugly forecast up here. And so I would expect there to be at least forecast risk for the Seattle game 2 hours south. We haven't pulled any of the models or the numbers yet, but that is something I would keep my eye on when you're looking at this game, just weather-wise. But the DK Metcalf injury is significant for the Seahawks offense, and you're probably getting a bit of a different looking Bills offense in this game. So a lot to kind of wait and see on the severity. If you take DK Metcalf out of this offense for Seattle, there's going to be some big concerns there on what they're going to be able to do and how they're going to have to change personnel-wise for Ryan Grubb. Saints, Chargers still off the board. LA plays tomorrow. Philadelphia on the road at the Cincinnati Bengals. Bengals were 3-point favorites on the look ahead. Down to 2.5. Don't agree with that. 49.5 on the total, down to 46.5 is the number being shown. A 3-point adjustment down on the total. Loss of Geno Stone is significant for the Bengals on the defensive backfield. When you think about the matchup and potential help over A.J. Brown, that's concerning. But the Bengals run defense up front, certainly as healthy as it has been in a long time. Man, a little bit surprised to see that taper off a little bit with the 3 down to the 2.5. Kansas City on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. Chiefs 10-point favorites on the look ahead. That's the reopen. 10-point favorites on the road in Las Vegas. Total 43.5 down to 42. Don't really have much of an opinion in here. All signs point towards Gardner Minshew starting in this game. Yeah, that's tough. That's a good number. Carolina on the road at the Denver Broncos. Come on. Broncos and Bo Nix from 4.5 to 7.5. This happens every week. This is too much. Panthers. There's no way. There's no way that Bo Nix can be laying 7.5. That's crazy. I know he went into the Saints and beat up a bad Saints team. Yeah, I'd certainly lean here to the Panthers at 7.5. That's a big one. Even that Broncos win. I mean, what was the Broncos win against the Saints? It was Spencer Rattler and a bunch of backups. I mean, you're going to give a field goal upgrade to beating Bub Means, running post routes on the sidelines, taking throws from Spencer Rattler in like an all-time motivation spot for Sean Payton going back to get the and even with Sean Payton, I mean, the Broncos have been very conservative late in games. It's not like they're running up the score and winning by margin. A lot of the production for Bo Nix has been garbage time outside of the Saints game, where they're playing a team that's riddled with injuries in their third game in 11 days, which apparently seemed to matter against the Saints. But then also, the only time we've seen anything from Bo Nix was the Bucs game. But that Bucs, they were riddled with injuries in the secondary. And so this seems like a lot. Jeff says the Broncos only need 2 field goals and a safety. They might get all of that in the first 3 drives against this Panthers team, the way it's going. And look, I've been able to avoid the Panthers for like 3 weeks in a row. And it's a running joke on the Wednesday live stream. It's like friends don't let friends bet the Panthers, and people are telling me not to do it. I don't know how anyone gets to 7.5 on Denver in this game. I don't know how you get there. Can't see it. Dallas on the road at the San Francisco 49ers. 6.5 on the look ahead, down to 6 for San Francisco. I'm seeing 5.5 at FanDuel and trending in. So Dallas is off of the bye. How low is this going to go? Because the Cowboys, it's hard to make a decision on this game right now because the Cowboys have those defensive injuries up front. The 49ers don't know what they're getting with Jennings. You don't know what you're getting with Ayuk. You don't know potentially what you're still getting with Mason, who's less than 100%. And then whatever the Samuels scenario was, I'm not too sure. If the Cowboys still have those injuries up front on defense and at the linebacker group, and they go on the road here into San Francisco, and let's say Ayuk is out and he's injured and lost long term, but let's say that Jennings and Debo, full participants all week, and they're back and they're playing, and you have that complement of weapons to go along with Kittle, and now you have Ricky Pearsall back with another week to get integrated. And let's say off the Ayuk news, maybe this comes in a little bit, and those guys on defense are still out. And initially, my reaction is that this would set up well for what San Francisco does best on offense against that Cowboys defense that has had no answer against it against any team all season. And this game now with the 49ers at 3-4 is like elevated importance. And I guess I'm curious to see if this comes in further, because even what Dak and the Cowboys have done well going up against offensively in the ideal personnel packages is not at all what San Francisco runs, which would in theory make the matchup a lot more difficult. And so I'm waiting. I'm going to wait on this one and see what happens, whether it's the Ayuk news, the Cowboys defensive news, what have you. A lot to kind of wait out and see, but I don't necessarily initially agree with the 49ers being downgraded off of that performance against a very good Chiefs team, given all the injuries and stuff that they were kind of working through, all of which was kind of thrown on them in the last minute. And just, it's the worst we've seen Purdy play arguably in his career. And this is just a much different defense and opponent in the Dallas Cowboys. And so curious to see how much this comes in. And then it's Monday Night Football. Boy, what a great game this is. The Giants on the road at the Pittsburgh Steelers. My goodness. Steelers were 4-point favorites on the look ahead with a total of 39. Early numbers that were circled because the Steelers play shortly. Just midweek betting on the look aheads. 39 was down to 37.5, and 4 was down to 3.5 on the point spread. So we'll see what the numbers fully reopen at tomorrow morning. Once we get a price after the Steelers game on Sunday Night Football with Russell Wilson making his debut. That will do it for the Week 7 recap, Week 8 opening lines, initial reaction. There are 5 games still off of the board with the doubleheader on Monday Night Football, which I believe thankfully ends this week. And we're back to a normal rotation. Next week, 16 games on the board, no buys. So it is a full slate and a full card and a busy one. It just kind of recapping my thoughts here, I would say Thursday Night Football is maybe semi-intriguing, but it's not really in an ideal spot anymore. I'm curious maybe a little bit in Green Bay, Jacksonville. Curious maybe a little bit in Buffalo, Seattle. Don't initially agree with that downgrade on Cincinnati, but something to look at, I think, a little bit further. And then, to me, Denver getting to 7.5 is, wow. That's a big number. Now, as I sit here and think about it, Patrick Surtain would obviously be back for the Broncos on defense. Maybe this is also a spot where Deontay Johnson hits the trade block. There were rumors this week of him possibly being on the move. Obviously, Adam Thielen's still not on the field. And so the Panthers are in some ways void of talent at wide receiver. But defensively, that's been their big issue. I mean, you're conceding 34 plus a game. It shouldn't be that against Bo Nix or even on the road. And so maybe not something to jump on, but something I'm certainly thinking about. So looks like another generally tough week of betting coming up ahead in week number 8. Appreciate everybody for stopping by. If you enjoyed the recap, if you enjoyed the show and you have a second, hit the subscribe button down below, hit the thumbs up. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, hopefully you're having a good Sunday evening or good start to your Monday morning. If you have a chance before you go to hit pause and scroll down in your podcast player and leave a review or a comment on the podcast, I would appreciate that very much. Let's hope that both totals on Monday, especially that Chargers-Cardinals over, go the way of what we were hoping, and it ends up as a 2-2 week. Have a fantastic Sunday night, everybody. Have a fantastic Monday. I'll talk back with each and every one of you here on the channel and the podcast feed bright and early on Tuesday morning.